Pinehurst University looked peaceful under the August moon. Old brick buildings stood silent. Tall oak trees cast long, dark shadows across the manicured lawns. It seemed like the perfect place. A place for learning. A place for fun. A place for making friends. But, something was wrong with Pinehurst. It had a history, a dark one. They didn't tell you that on the campus tour, they didn't put it in the shiny brochures. The secrets were buried deep, like bones under the perfectly green grass. And tonight, on this calm Tuesday, those secrets were about to claw their way back to the surface. My name is Maya. I'm a sophomore, and I thought I knew everything about this place. I lived in the oldest dorm, Blackwood Hall, with my roommate, Chloe. We loved the creaky floors and the drafty windows. It felt historic. It felt real. My best friend Liam lived in the dorm across the quad. We were a tight group, always together. We studied together in the library, ate greasy pizza together in the student union, and told each other everything. Or so I thought. We felt safe here. We felt invincible. We were so wrong. That night, a strange chill swept across the campus, colder than any autumn wind. It wasn't just the air, it was a feeling, a deep, unsettling dread that settled in your bones. The kind of feeling that makes the hair on your arms stand up. The kind that makes you look over your shoulder, even when you know no one is there. It started with little things. A flicker of the lights in the common room. A door slamming shut in an empty hallway. The sound of footsteps echoing behind you, only to vanish when you turned around. We all tried to laugh it off, blaming it on the old buildings. But the laughter sounded hollow, forced. We were all gathered in my dorm room, trying to ignore the growing unease. Liam was trying to tell a joke, but his eyes kept darting toward the window. Chloe was pretending to read her psychology textbook, but she hadn't turned a page in 10 minutes. Even my other friend, Ben, who was usually the brave one, sat quietly, staring at the floor. The campus outside was eerily quiet, too quiet. No late-night shouts from fraternities, no music blasting from open windows. It was as if the entire university was holding its breath, waiting for something terrible to happen. We just didn't know how terrible it would be. The strange events started to get worse. It was no longer just a feeling. Things were happening. Tangible things. Things you couldn't explain away. Sarah, a girl from the third floor, swore she saw a figure standing outside her window. A tall, dark shape with no face, but she lived on the third floor. There was no balcony, no fire escape. Just a sheer brick wall going down to the ground. Everyone said she was just stressed from midterms. They told her she was imagining things. But when I saw the sheer terror in her eyes, I wasn't so sure. She looked like she had seen a ghost. Then came the whispers. You'd be walking back from a late class, the path lit only by the weak glow of the campus lamps. And you'd hear it, a soft hissing sound like someone whispering your name right behind your ear. Maya. I heard it one night. I spun around, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird, but there was nothing there. Just the empty path and the rustling leaves. I told myself it was the wind. It had to be the wind. But the wind doesn't know your name. The whispers seem to follow you, slithering into your dorm rooms through the cracks under the doors. The campus legends, once told as spooky jokes around campfires, suddenly felt too real. Stories of the Pinehurst Phantom, a student who vanished from his dorm room 50 years ago, were repeated in hushed tones. They said his ghost still roamed the halls looking for something he had lost, or someone. Flyers for a missing student, a freshman named Emily, started appearing on bulletin boards. Her smiling face looked out from the paper, a cheerful photo from a happier time. She was last seen leaving the library. The flyers stayed up for a week, then 2. Soon they were covered by ads for club meetings and bake sales. But her face haunted me. One night, Liam and I were cutting across the main quad. A thick fog had rolled in, blanketing everything in a damp gray shroud. The bell tower was completely invisible. We could barely see 10 feet in front of us. Suddenly, Liam stopped. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my skin. "Did you see that?" he whispered, his voice trembling. I peered into the mist, my eyes straining. For a split second, I saw it too. A tall figure, darker than the fog, moving between the trees. It didn't walk, it glided, and then it was gone. We didn't walk back to the dorms, we ran. The campus was on edge. The whispers and shadows were one thing, but then, the fear became real. It happened on a Thursday night. A storm was raging outside, rain lashing against the windows and thunder rattling the old dorm buildings. Most students were inside, huddled in their rooms. That's when we heard it, a scream. It wasn't a playful shriek or a yell from a movie. It was a raw, blood-curdling scream of pure terror. It cut through the sound of the storm, sharp and clear before being abruptly silenced. Everyone in Blackwood Hall froze. We looked at each other, our faces pale in the dim light. We rushed out into the hallway, doors opening all at once. Students poured out of their rooms, their faces a mixture of confusion and fear. "What was that?" someone asked, their voice shaking. Where did it come from? Another person shouted. It seemed to have come from the back of the dorm, near the woods that bordered the campus. The resident advisor, a senior named Mark, tried to calm everyone down. He told us to stay in our rooms, to lock our doors. He said he was calling campus security, but his own hands were trembling as he held his phone. We all knew this was more than just a prank. Campus security arrived with their flashing blue lights cutting through the rain and fog. They searched the area with powerful flashlights, their beams slicing through the darkness behind the dorm. We watched from our windows, our breath fogging up the cold glass. They didn't find anyone. They said it was probably just some students fooling around trying to scare people. But the next morning, we knew they were wrong. Sarah, the girl from the third floor, was gone. Her room was empty, her bed was neatly made, but her window was wide open, the curtains whipping wildly in the wind. And on her desk was a single, dead pine branch. The news spread like a virus. Sarah wasn't just missing, she was gone. The police came asking questions, taking notes, but they had no leads. No one had seen anything except a shadow. No one had heard anything but a single scream, swallowed by the storm. Fear was no longer a whisper, it was a heavy blanket suffocating the entire campus. We started walking in groups, even in broad daylight. The nights became a time of terror. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside sent a fresh wave of panic through the dorms. The killer had a name now. The local news called them the campus killer, and we knew they were still out there, watching us. The disappearance of Sarah changed everything. The campus was no longer a safe haven, it was a hunting ground, and we were the prey. The police presence increased, but it didn't make us feel any safer. The killer was a ghost, a shadow that moved without a sound and left no trace except for the terror they left behind, and the pine branches. That became their signature. A small, dead branch left where the victim was last seen. It was a chilling message, a symbol of the life that had been taken. The police were baffled, and the fear on campus grew with each passing day. We started to suspect everyone. Was it the creepy janitor who always seemed to be lurking in the hallways late at night? Or the quiet professor whose office was filled with strange old books about local folklore? Every stranger was a potential threat. Every familiar face was a mask that could be hiding a monster. Chloe became obsessed with the psychology of the killer, spending hours in the library reading about criminal profiling. She claimed the killer was intelligent, organized, and probably someone we knew, someone who could blend in perfectly. Her words did nothing to calm our nerves. The killer seemed to play with us, leaving clues that were both terrifying and confusing. One morning, every single car in the faculty parking lot had a pine branch placed carefully on its windshield. It was a massive statement, an act of defiance against the authorities, a reminder that the killer could go anywhere, do anything without being caught. The campus went into lockdown for a day, but nothing happened. It was just a mind game, a way to keep us all perpetually terrified, looking over our shoulders, unable to trust the person walking next to us. The psychological toll was immense. My friends and I tried to stick together to create a small island of safety in the sea of fear, but the suspicion began to creep in, poisoning our friendship. I noticed Liam was acting strangely. He was more withdrawn, jumpy, and secretive. He would disappear for hours without telling anyone where he was going. When I confronted him, he just said he needed some time alone. But I saw the lie in his eyes. Was he just scared like the rest of us? Or was he hiding something much, much darker? The thought was terrifying, something I couldn't even bear to consider. But in a place like Pinehurst, you had to consider everything. The library, once a place of quiet study, became the epicenter of our dread. It was the last place Emily was seen alive, and its towering shelves and shadowed corners now felt menacing. The silence was no longer peaceful, it was heavy with unspoken fear. Every cough, every dropped book made us jump. We still had to study, exams were not going to wait for a killer to be caught. So we went in groups, always sitting at large tables in the brightly lit main reading room. No one dared to venture into the secluded stacks in the back, where the tall shelves created a dark and confusing maze. One evening, Chloe, Ben, and I were cramming for a history exam. Liam was nowhere to be found again. He had texted earlier saying he was feeling sick. The library was mostly empty, the clock on the wall ticking loudly toward closing time. Chloe was convinced the killer was a student, someone who knew the campus layout intimately. "Think about it," she whispered, her eyes wide. "They know the schedules, the blind spots and security camera coverage, the old service tunnels under the quad. It has to be one of us." Her theory sent a shiver down my spine. I looked around at the few other students scattered around the room. Any one of them could be the killer. Suddenly, the lights in the entire library flickered violently, then went out. We were plunged into absolute darkness. A collective gasp echoed through the vast room. My heart leaped into my throat. For a moment there was dead silence, broken only by the sound of our own panicked breathing. Then, from the back of the library, From deep within the maze of stacks came a sound, a soft rhythmic scraping. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It was a chilling, methodical sound, and it was getting closer. Someone in the darkness whimpered. We were trapped. Ben, trying to be the hero, fumbled for his phone, its screen providing a tiny beacon of light. "Stay here!" he hissed, and started moving toward the sound. It was the stupidest thing he could have possibly done. "Ben, no!" I screamed in a whisper. But he was already gone, swallowed by the darkness. The scraping stopped. The silence that followed was even more terrifying. We called his name, our voices trembling. No answer. Then the lights flickered back on, buzzing erratically. The library was empty except for us, and on the floor at the entrance to the dark stacks was Ben's phone, and lying next to it, a single freshly broken pine branch. Ben wasn't dead. He was found about an hour later, locked in a small storage closet in the library's basement. He was shaking and couldn't even speak, his eyes wide with a terror I had never seen before. He couldn't describe who had attacked him, he just said it was a shape, a blur of motion in the darkness. It moved with this, like, really unnatural speed. He told the police he'd been dragged down the stairs and thrown into the closet. The killer had stood outside the door for what felt like an eternity, their slow, steady breathing audible through the wood, before finally walking away. They were toying with him, torturing him. The attack on Ben just shattered what little trust remained within our group. The killer had been in the library with us, they had been close enough to touch, and honestly, suspicion fell squarely on Liam. He was the only one who wasn't there. His excuse of being sick now seemed flimsy, like a really convenient alibi. Chloe was convinced. She presented her evidence like a prosecutor, Liam's recent secretive behavior, his absences, his knowledge of the campus. "It all fits, Maya," she insisted, her voice cold and certain. "He's been lying to us. He's the killer." I didn't want to believe it, but the doubt was a poison just seeping into my mind. I had to know the truth. I went to Liam's dorm room, my heart hammering against my ribs. I found him packing a bag, his movements frantic and clumsy. When he saw me, his face was a mask of panic and despair. "It's not what you think, Maya," he pleaded, his voice cracking. He wouldn't look me in the eye. I saw a box peeking out from under his bed. My hands trembling, I pulled it out. Inside, my blood just ran cold. There was a collection of dead pine branches, dozens of them. And underneath them, a dark hooded sweatshirt and a pair of muddy boots. It was like a total nightmare. "Liam, why?" I whispered, tears streaming down my face. He finally broke down, sobbing. He confessed that he had been following the real killer. He was obsessed, trying to figure out who it was on his own. He thought if he could unmask them he could be a hero and stop the killings. The pine branches? He had been collecting them from the crime scenes, thinking they might hold some clue, some fingerprint the police had missed. It was a stupid, reckless plan, but as I looked into his terrified eyes, I believed him. He wasn't a monster, he was just a scared kid and way over his head. But if it wasn't Liam, then who was it? My belief in Liam's innocence put me at odds with Chloe. She refused to listen, convinced he was a manipulative liar. "He's playing you, Maya," she warned, her tone sharp. "You're going to be his next victim." Our friendship, once the bedrock of my life, just crumbled into dust. She started avoiding me, looking at me with a mixture of pity and fear. I was on my own. Liam went into hiding, terrified that the police or the real killer would find him. Ben was too traumatized to be of any help. The campus felt more dangerous than ever, and I felt completely, utterly alone. The killer was still out there, and they knew we were getting closer. The killer's game escalated. It was no longer about random acts of terror. It became personal. They started leaving messages for me. Not with pine branches, but with my own things. One morning, I found my favorite scarf, the one my grandmother had given me, tied to the doorknob of my dorm room. It was shredded like as if by a wild animal. The message was clear. "I can get to you. I can take what you love." I reported it to campus security, but what could they do? There were no witnesses, no cameras in the hallway. I felt a constant prickling sensation of being watched, even in my own room. The hunter was closing in. I started sleeping with a chair wedged under my doorknob. I barely ate. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every footstep in the hall sent my heart into a frantic rhythm. Then I received a text from an unknown number. It was a picture of me, taken through my own dorm room window. I was sitting at my desk, my back to the camera. The photo had been taken just moments before. I screamed and scrambled away from the window, my whole body shaking. They were outside. Right now. Watching me. Waiting. The game was no longer about scaring the campus, it was about breaking me. I knew I couldn't wait for them to make the final move. Liam and I decided to set a trap. It was a desperate, foolish plan, born of terror and adrenaline. Using Liam's knowledge of the campus tunnels, we would lure the killer to the old abandoned observatory at the edge of the woods. It was the one place on campus with no security, no lights, no hope of rescue. We sent an anonymous tip to the campus newspaper, claiming we had evidence of the killer's identity, and would reveal it at the observatory at midnight. We hoped the killer's ego would be too big to resist. We were betting our lives on it. The observatory was a skeletal ruin against the moonless sky. Its dome was cracked open, like a broken egg. Liam and I hid in the shadows, our hearts pounding in unison. The air was cold and still. Midnight came and went. Nothing. The silence just stretched on, thick and suffocating. Maybe it was a stupid plan. Maybe the killer wasn't coming. Then we heard it. The crunch of leaves. A single set of footsteps, slow and deliberate, approaching the clearing. A figure emerged from the tree line. They were wearing a dark, hooded sweatshirt, their face hidden in shadow. The campus killer. The figure stopped in the center of the clearing, turning slowly, scanning the darkness. "I know you're here," a voice called out. It was a voice I knew, a voice I trusted. My blood turned to ice. It couldn't be. The figure pulled back their hood, and I saw her face, illuminated by a sliver of moonlight. It was Chloe, my roommate, my friend. She was smiling, but it was a cold, empty smile that didn't reach her eyes. The shock was like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. It didn't make sense. "Why? Surprised?" Chloe asked, her voice calm, almost cheerful. "You shouldn't be. I gave you all the clues." She started to walk toward us, her movements confident and predatory. "I told you the killer was intelligent. I told you they were someone who could blend in, someone nobody would suspect." She explained everything with a chilling detachment. Her obsession with psychology wasn't just academic. She saw the campus as her own personal social experiment. She wanted to see how fear worked, how it could break people, shatter friendships and reduce an entire community to chaos. We weren't people to her, we were lab rats. Liam stepped out from the shadows, his face a mess of disbelief and horror. "Chloe, why?" he choked out. Chloe's smile widened. "Because it was fun, Liam. It was a thrill no textbook could ever give me." She held up her hands, and for the first time I saw she was wearing gloves. Sarah was getting too close. She saw me near the tunnels. Ben was just a game. "But you two," she said, her gaze locking onto me. "You were my masterpiece. Watching your little friendship fall apart was the best part." She took another step closer. "And now, the experiment needs a conclusion." She lunged at me. The next few moments were a blur of chaos and terror. Liam tackled Chloe, throwing her to the ground just as she lunged for me. They wrestled on the forest floor, a tangled mess of limbs in the darkness. I scrambled backward, my mind just screaming. Chloe was stronger than she looked, fueled by a terrifying rage. She pushed Liam off and got to her feet, a wild look in her eyes. "You should have just stayed out of it," she shrieked. She ran, not at me, but toward the dark woods, vanishing into the trees before we could even react. We were left alone in the clearing, panting, the terrible truth hanging in the air between us. The police arrived minutes later. Liam had called them before we left, telling them our plan. They swarmed the area, but Chloe was gone. She knew the woods, the tunnels, the campus better than anyone. She had vanished as completely as the Pinehurst phantom. The campus was safe for now, but there was no relief. The truth was just too horrifying. The monster who had haunted our nightmares was the same person I had shared a room with, laughed with, and trusted with my life. The secret was out, but the fear didn't go away. It just changed shape. Life at Pinehurst never returned to normal. How could it? A cloud of suspicion and grief hung over the brick buildings. Ben transferred to another school. Liam and I drifted apart, the shared trauma a chasm between us we could never cross. The university tried to erase the memory, but they couldn't. Every shadow looked like her. Every whisper on the wind sounded like her voice. Chloe was never found. She became a new campus legend, a ghost story to tell freshmen to scare them. The campus killer of Pinehurst, a chilling tale. But for me, it was a memory that would never fade. Years later, long after I graduated, I still had nightmares. But the final twist, the most unforgettable secret, came in a letter. It arrived on the anniversary of that night, with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a dead pine branch. The note was short, written in a familiar, neat handwriting. It said, "You were always my favorite part of the experiment. Did you really think I'd let you go? I'm watching you. Always." And then I knew. The experiment wasn't over. It had just moved off campus. And I was, and always would be, the final subject.